What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Hardcore Fab Shop. On today's video, we are talking about the complete air ride system on my truck. I've got a bunch of old footage of when we was putting the thing together, and I've got what it looks like now, and you guys just seen what it can do. So if you're interested in knowing how all this stuff works and plays together, stick around, watch the video. So for those of you that are watching this video and have not watched any of my previous videos, I've done a complete build on this truck from day one, tree row fine, to what you've seen just a second ago in the video. And it is all on YouTube. You can go check it out, all of it, every bit of it. I put as much information on there as I could for you guys. And one of those videos that's actually been my most popular video was on this front cantilever air ride setup. Now, I've already done that video, so I'm not going to go a real deep dive into this stuff. You know, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but there is a problem with that video that I did not cover, and I should have covered it, I guess, because I've had a lot of people hit me up and have concern about my airbag setup here on the front. So I want to cover that in this video right off the bat, hopefully inform some people on how that is all working and the situation that we've got going on there, and hopefully ease some people's minds on that part of it. So I'm going to cover that to begin with, and then we'll go right on down the system, and we'll talk about every step of the way of what's in the system and how it's installed and the whole 9 yards. So the issue that a few people were having with the cantilever air ride video was the angle of the bag at the top there. They were thinking that that was going to be a fail point in the system, and I have to say that it's probably not the best scenario for the longevity of the bag. There's other scenarios that would make it probably last just a little bit longer. I will agree with that 100%. And there's also ways that I could have done a cantilever air ride system that would not have the angle of that bag be so dramatic at the top, but it would require a bunch more stuff crammed into this area that I already don't have any room. So I cannot do that because I still need to have a motor in this thing. I still need exhaust. I still need steering and all that sort of stuff. So I don't want to have all that extra garbage in the way down there. So I'm not going to do that. This thing is sitting here fully extended. I've got 8 inches on it, thereabouts. Let me show you that real quick. Okay, so I lied to you. It's like 7 3/4. So that's as far up as it's going to go. We can't go any higher than that because the front shocks are maxed out. The shot of that too. You can see the top of the shock is hanging out past the little shield thing. So since that is as far as it's going to go, we're not going to get any more angle than that out of the bag. So what is the angle of the bag? Right there. We're hanging in there right around 27-ish or so degrees. So long before I designed this, long before I designed the hookers or the old crow back there and other stuff in the past, I went to Firestone, which is the biggest name in airbags and rubber and all that sort of thing, right? And I went to their website and I went through all of their information and found what angle is acceptable from Firestone. I don't know who is more of an authority on that than them, so I figured whatever they said would be something that I'd be able to use. Alright, so we got that out of the way now. I want to actually show you where it sits at ride height, because this is where it's going to be when it's actually rolling down the road. So at ride height, I've got this thing at right around 4 inches, thereabouts, and our angle is about 12 degrees right there. And that, while I'm here, puts my bolts in my arms right parallel in line with each other. I think that's actually going to give me the best ride that I can get out of this system if I have those parallel with each other. If they were offset with each other, or if they were going uphill or downhill as I hit bumps and things like that, I think it's going to want to make the front end kind of move around a little bit. So that's the reason why I've got it all set up in that particular arrangement. There's one thing that nobody even brought up that actually is an issue with this whole system, and I want to go ahead and address that too real quick because I'm sitting right here by it, and it's something that I think everybody should know about if they were thinking about doing anything like this on their own ride. So I've got my steering box set way back here, and it works out really good that way and lines up really good with my steering column and all of that. And then I've got kind of a push-pull thing going on here, and then it goes up there to that arm on my axle. I've got basically the same thing on the old Crow truck, just a little different style, but same theory. So the one thing that you should know about a system like this is if you have something like that, you are going to get bump steer out of it. The reason why you would get bump steer in a steering system like this is because the drag length that's between the steering arm on the axle and the steering box is actually longer than the two arms out here on the front suspension. So since they're at different lengths, they're going to play different as it goes through the cycle of the suspension, and the place that gets pushed on is the steering arm. So it goes right on back through that drag length into the steering box and into the steering wheel, and there's your bump steer. And the only way you could really take care of any bump steer like that would be to have the drag length between the axle and the steering box be the exact same length as the front suspension pieces are, and you'd also have to have all the pivot points lined up with each other so that they would all move together in sync. But there's really no way to do that because we've got a steering box that would have to be right in place of where the airbag is and also our suspension arms. So you just can't accomplish that with this system. Keep that in mind. It's not the end of the world for me personally. I know how to drive it and handle that and be just perfectly fine, but it could be an issue for some of you guys. So I'm trying to make you aware of everything as much as I possibly can. So I think now we've got all of that out of the way, we can actually address all the parts and pieces in the truck, and I'll give you kind of the best explanation as I can to how they're all put in and how they go together and what they do. So I guess if we're doing that, we'll start off with the bags since we're right here. And the bags on the front and the rear are all the same bags. They're a 2,600 pound bag. I did not splurge and buy high-end bags. These are pretty low budget deals that I found on eBay and probably kind of bottom of the barrel. So take that for what it's worth. I guess we'll all see in the end, if you guys want to follow along, how long they last before they actually blow, because I do plan on driving this a lot more, and we'll clock some miles on it and we'll see how it plays out over the next year, 2, 3, 10, 25, whatever it takes to blow them out. Probably won't last 25, but anyways, that's what those bags are. And I am going to go ahead and try to get you guys a link to everything that I can in the description below. So if you are looking for any of these parts, you can go right down there. You can try to find them. And if you don't want to buy them there, at least you'll know what it was that I was using. So then for Airlines coming off of the bags, the Airlines on this truck here are all 3/8 Airlines. That's a plastic airline. It could be argued that there's other scenarios out there that would be better than the plastic airline, but overall, I think they're pretty decent and haven't really had a whole lot of problems with them. You do have some problems with some fittings and things from here and there if you don't have high-end fittings, but the nicer fittings are a lot more expensive, so I've kind of opted out of using those as well and just kind of know that I'm going to have to deal with whatever issues that I have coming up with my fittings. So these push lock style fittings are the fittings that I am using on this truck. They're not probably the best fittings, to be truthful with you right off the bat, because these I don't believe are DOT rated. The DOT ones are supposed to have a little stem that comes out the center there that kind of helps support the tube and everything, keep it from leaking down the line. This one, that was just a straight one. This one has got a swivel in it, and it's also a 90, so that's handy for a lot of situations. This is another style of them that I've got here in the shop. You actually would just take this nut off, you'd slide it onto the line, you shove the line onto that little nub that's sticking up there, and then you just tighten it down. And as you tighten it down, it tightens up the hose onto the fitting. So I have some of those as well. I don't like using those nearly as much as these because these are super convenient just to slide something on there open it up, pull the hose off. Also got some of these that are also kind of the same theory as this, but they're all plastic. And this is probably more of like a home usage type thing. I would not recommend using this on a vehicle. I think that's probably a bad scenario. And I'll show you this here I've got set up. This is kind of a mixture of some household stuff and some of these first fittings that I showed you. They're shoved on there, and I made this up so I could have something just to be able to hook the shop air up to, air up the bags, and kind of just check movement of the whole system while it's here in the shop and I don't have everything all plumbed. And also, you know, just kind of be able to roll the truck around and things like that. It's got just a little barbed fitting T here in the center, and it works better than you'd think it would without even a clamp on it, but definitely would not want to do something like that and not have a clamp on there. But in the end, these barbed fittings like this are probably not your best scenario there again for a vehicle. I would rather have a fitting myself that would actually lock in. They make some like this that do T's and just connectors and the whole 9 yards. So that's probably what I would go for. I wouldn't do this scenario here. But like I said, this is handy for just using it around the shop, and this is stuff that you can just go to a local hardware store and buy. So that's something to be said for that. Also, while I've got this T sitting here like this, you should not plumb your vehicle this way when you're plumbing it. You should have an individual line to each bag. Don't do a T like this, because what ends up happening is if you've got a load in this bag, it's going to build pressure in the bag and then push the pressure back through the line and then right over into the other bag. So if you're in a corner where this one's unloading and this one's loading, then what's going to happen is you're going to actually get even more body roll out of it than you would normally, because you're going to transfer that load into the side that's unloading. So it just kind of compounds the whole problem. It's just not a very good scenario. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using 3/8 plastic line to be able to run all my lines. This is an air brake line, so it's DOT approved, so it's pretty decent stuff. It's pretty flexible. You don't have to have elbows and stuff everywhere that you go with it, so you can get some flex out of it, and it doesn't like collapsing on itself until it gets pulled together pretty tight. So overall, pretty decent stuff to work with. You do have to, however, keep in mind when you're laying this out that you can't have it sitting there rubbing on something on the frame, because it will easily cut through it if you've got a piece of metal sitting there rubbing on it. So the best way that I've found to be able to attach it is to get one of these little universal kits here with a bunch of different sizes of cushion clamps in it, and you can use these cushion clamps to actually take and mount this airline pretty quick and easy. They got all different sizes in here, so if you've got multiple lines that you need to do, you can step up to a bigger one, but these right here work out really good with just a little 1/2 inch one, and it'll compress down on there and actually hold it pretty tight. So that's what I've been using on mine, and to install these, I'm just simply drilling a hole and tapping it. I've got some pretty cool little stainless steel Allen head bolts, and I've got the tap for that and a drill for that. And let me just show you real quick on this little piece of square tubing here. My whole chassis is square tubing, so I can't drill a hole and put a nut on the backside, so that's the reason why I'm tapping it, just an FYI. And most of you got an idea of what it takes to be able to drill and tap a hole, but I'm going to go ahead and do it here real quick for you anyways. Don't take very long with this skinny little metal. So once you've got your hole all drilled, I actually just power tap it with my drill. And you can just sit there and run it in. This isn't rocket science by any way, shape, or form. Most of you guys are going to be able to do this. This is pretty easy stuff. Biggest thing is finding the bolt and getting the right size drill and tap and everything to work with whatever it is that you use to bolt it down with. And there you guys go. It's as simple as that. Pretty easy. I think the next thing I want to show you guys is what I've got going on inside the cab. Alright, so for air management on the truck, I've got one of these 4-play boxes from Airjacks. This is a pretty slick setup because it's a manual valve setup. So what does that mean? Well, you manually control up and down how much air you want to have in each corner. So I don't have a bunch of extra solenoids and switches and wiring and plumbing and things like that to deal with. That is all done right here in this little box. And it's also very simple to install. You've got all these ports on the back of it. This port right here is actually having the air coming in from your pressure tank, and then you've got air to each individual bag handled through these ports right there. You've got air in and out through these ports, just depending on what you do with the switch. And then when the air comes out of the bags, it is dumped out of this port right here, so you can get that outside of the cab of the truck. And then you've got a gauge off of each one of these little ones down here at the bottom for each individual bag. So to install this, I'm going to cut like a 3/16 plate or maybe an 1/8 inch plate, and I'm going to build up a little piece right here off the corner bottom of the dash with that. I'm going with a thick piece out there on the end so that I can actually drill and tap for a bolt on each corner, and then I can just reset this in there and go right into that plate. It'll be a sheet metal piece on the sides of that. So for gauges, I've got these gauges right here, and they're a 2-in-1 gauge, so I only have to have 2 of those into the dash. And I've got a piece of exhaust tubing already cut and fit on there to go around it. And what I'm going to do with it is recess it right here on the side of the steering column. Like I said, I got 2 of these, so 2 ports right there for the gauges to sit in, and then we can be able to control it all right here, right in arm's length, real easy to get to. So I think that's going to be a pretty slick little install right there, and not much to it. So stick around and watch how that goes together. Well, there you go. That's good enough for some gauges on a rat rod, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the plate that I've got made up. I went ahead and did 3/16 to be able to thread it for our box to screw to. I'm going to go ahead and figure out a place here to weld that on. I guess right about there. Well, let's drop our gauges in here and see what this thing looks like when it's all together. There we go. I like it. Looks pretty good. We'll have our original dash bezel in here, and the steering column comes up right in through this part right here. So I think that's actually going to work out quite well, and I think it's going to look good in the truck. So I sent the dash and the inside of the cab over to A&J Repair and Refinishing over in South Hutchinson, Kansas, and you can kind of see the install there of the foreplay box and kind of how that all played out and merged into the dash. And there is our gauges. I think they turned out quite well. I do only have a couple of screws in here. I lost my tap for that, so I'll get those in there later. And to go up and down, well, let me show you right here first. That is where I like to have the pressure sitting at when I'm at ride height. These are my front gauges, and these are the rear gauges. And I'll move this a little bit, and you can kind of see. There's two separate needles in there for both sides. So each side has their own needle so we can keep track of it. So other than this big wadded up mess of shit right here, everything is ran in the frame like it's going to be on the truck. So I'll give you kind of a layout of the way that's working. This front left bag is actually running across the frame and coming over to the passenger side and joining up with the airline from the passenger side front bag. And they jog down the side of the frame rail on the passenger side and then meet up over here. And we got kind of the same thing happening in the back. The driver's side rear is coming down the frame until you get to the end of the step right here, and then it crosses over and joins up with the other bag on the back, and they come down along the side of the frame rail. I'm going to have all of this going up into the firewall where it's going to meet up with our foreplay box eventually, but for right now I just kind of had it rigged together to kind of lift it up, move it around, show you guys, and just make sure everything wasn't leaking on the bag system while it had everything all out in the open. So now that that's all together, you can kind of see it up. I can let it down. There you go. It goes down and goes up pretty fast. Now this is still running air off of my shop compressor, and I'll show you where that's tying in right now real quick. So I've got that tying in right here. The way this is going to work eventually is the hose that's coming off of this manifold here where the two compressors are coming together is going to run right down this frame rail. I'm waiting on a T because I'm going to put a T right here on this corner of this frame rail right here. And the T is going to allow it to feed from the compressors straight into the control box up there in the cab. But then it's also going to tee up and then go through the bottom of the bed floor and go into the air tank that we're having for running the system on the truck. So for the air tank, I actually used one of these old vintage air bombs, and this air bomb actually originally started out life as an oxygen tank on a old bomber from back like World War II stuff. I'm gonna say like B-17 and some of those models of bombers like that back in the day. And I just took and had a fitting put on here on the end, and then we've got our airline that's coming down here, and this is the one that we teed off of underneath the bed floor. So that's our air feed in here and out of here for the storage tank. This is a large tank that is almost 10 gallons, so that's a lot of air in there. So we had to accommodate that with our compressors and stuff, which we'll talk about here in a minute. On the other side of it, we've got a fitting on that side too. It's just a regular air chuck like you would have in your shop, and we've got that on there so that if we needed to add air from an external source we can, and then also we could actually run an air tool or something off of it as well if we needed to. I've got the burlap just kind of shoved in here to kind of hide the airline, because there again, that would have been something that might have been on an old record truck or something at the time. Wasn't trying to hide it all that much, but it does hide it just a little bit. And then you can see you got just a little bit of baling wire on there actually holding it on, and there's a little piece of plate down here on the bottom Yeah, you can't really see it, but there's a little bracket down there underneath that's kind of a cradle in it as well, and gives us a place to tie the baling wire to. So for the size of the tank on this truck, I decided I needed to go ahead and run a dual compressor setup back here in the back. These are a 480C via air compressor, and they ought to have plenty of power to be able to fill up that big tank that I've got back here. That tank is almost 10 gallons, so we needed a pretty good sized compressor to run that, and they've got a pretty decent duty cycle as far as that goes for being able to fill that up as well. You guys are going to want to research that a little bit and figure out what your needs are, how often you're going to be raising and lowering your truck or your car, whatever you're doing, how often you're going to be letting off your air horns, because if you got air on your truck, why wouldn't you have air horns, right? So you got to take those things into consideration when you're trying to pick the right size compressors for your setup. So that's going to be something that you're just going to have to kind of play out and figure out on your own. So wiring on the back of these are pretty simple. We've got a negative wire for each one, of course, and that's going to go straight onto our battery. And then to power the system, I'm going to come straight off the battery, go over to a fuse, and then from the fuse, I'm going to go to a couple of relays. Then each relay is going to run each compressor. So they'll each have their own. I've got a switch up here that's going to control whether or not they turn on or off based on the pressure in the system. This switch is going to be on the other side of these main feeds. There's a check valve in them that doesn't allow those to backfeed back into the compressor. So since we're on that side of it, it'll monitor the air system all the way through the truck from here up to the switch panel. So it'll know what we have in there, and it can turn on and off as needed. And that's basically what we've got. It's a pretty simple setup, and like I said earlier, I think about anybody could do it with just a little bit of time and just a little bit of effort.